So today we're going to talk about security, specifically in context of your Oracle R12 upgrade. And when we talk about security, we'll be mostly addressing technical security. We'll be avoiding the roles and responsibilities, functions, and menus, those kind of functional security that controls access to the different modules. Instead, we'll be talking mostly about the technology stack, the database, the application server, and the application itself. Primarily trying to prevent people either internally or externally hacking into your Oracle E-Business Suite environment. So a brief introduction to Integrigy. There you go. Sorry about that. Sometimes the slide's a little slow in transitioning. So a little background about Integrigy. We were founded in 2001, and we've actually focused in on Oracle E-Business Suite since that time. We do both consulting, and we also have a product called App Sentry that basically automates a lot of the things we'll talk about today in terms of checking and assessing your security of your Oracle E-Business Suite environment. One of the questions we do get often is, how does Integrigy know so much about Oracle E-Business Suite security? Firstly, we've been working with it since 2001. And second, we do a lot of research internally to actually discover security bugs, security weaknesses, and those type of things. So this list here is some of the security bugs we've opened with Oracle. We've opened over 70 and have been fixed as part of the critical patch updates. So today we're going to talk about your R12 upgrade. And what do you need to do it to improve the security? And then we'll actually talk about the differences between 11i and R12 in terms of security. And then the last two sections will focus exclusively on R12, either security enhancements or some of the new security features that can be found in Release 12. So let's get started talking about improving security during the upgrade process. The upgrade process is one of those difficult times for any organization as you're going through a very rapid implementation of a new version of Oracle. You may be doing a true upgrade, which is an in-place upgrade, or a re-implementation. During the upgrade process, there's a lot of different things going on. There's a lot of testing going on, and there's a lot of new features coming functionally. But also there's features coming on the technical side and also new security features. And we'll kind of talk about those during the presentation today. Why do security during the upgrade? It's actually a very good time, especially if you're in your 11i environment. You haven't done a very good job about keeping up with critical patch updates. You haven't done a very good job on actually doing hardening over time. We find a lot of our clients are actually fairly behind on security, especially if they have an older implementation. You may have implemented 11.5.1 or 11.5.2 and upgrade that environment over time. Well, the R12 upgrade time is actually a very good period to actually implement a lot of new security features and other enhancements to the system. First, you're doing a major technology stack upgrade. You're getting new versions of the application server, of the database, and the application itself. Especially with the database, there's a number of new features within the 11G database that provide enhanced security for your entire environment. Another good advantage is you're resetting the security patching. You may be behind a year or two on your critical patch updates. Well, at go live, now you can actually be up to date with your security patches fairly easily, and then also put in a process moving forward to keep current with those security patches. Second, and probably the primary reason that security is actually a great time to implement during your upgrade, is you're doing significant testing, both from a functional application testing, but also performance and trust testing most likely. A lot of security features that you would like to implement, such as auditing and encryption, often should be performance tested. Well, if you're doing performance testing cycles already, isn't it a great time to actually implement these features today, included within your standard performance testing cycles, and almost get a free testing cycle? You don't have to do any separate testing. You don't have to do any separate functional testing. So a lot of these features that can be implemented very quickly as part of the upgrade process because you're already doing the testing. You've got people dedicated to it as part of the project team. You don't have to do any separate testing cycles. And finally, An area that we see many security vulnerabilities in for customers, probably about 30 to 40% when we do our assessments on site at a client, are related to customizations. Well, as part of the upgrade process, a lot of times you're actually either reviewing every single customization, and you're probably making modifications to a number of customizations as part of the upgrade. This is a great time to actually start reviewing your development standards, make sure you've got secure development standards. Well, initial development standards may have been created 5 or 10 years ago, where security was not as much of a focus. It's a good time to update those development standards, and then as you're doing a lot of customization reviews, identify security weaknesses. A lot of times we'll find SQL injection and other security vulnerabilities in the customizations, or maybe you're just FTPing files throughout your organization. Well, you can at least start moving to a more secure transport like SSH, or potentially start using some web services that can be encrypted using SSL. So the traditional R12 upgrade project, and we've worked with a number of clients who have upgraded recently to R12, and it seems to be much more in the last 6 to 12 months than previously. And this is a typical classic upgrade project. So you're basically doing the evaluate, plan, test, upgrades, and a post-upgrade process. And if you look through any consulting firm's methodology, including Oracle's, these are basically the steps involved. Well, what typically happens is when we start reviewing the upgrade project, there is really no security tasks involved in any of these processes. People are really just trying to get from 11i to R12 with minimal changes, hopefully go back to a more vanilla environment. And what happens is security is kind of being left off. It's a great opportunity to start implementing some new security features within your environment, and these actually get left off. People are just so worried about the upgrade that you can actually cut out hours and cost in the long term by trying to move these into the security, these into the actual upgrade project. So when we talk about an R12 upgrade, we want it to be security aware. And the goal here is not to implement every possible security feature, but really concentrate in on those high security value, but those that also involve low project effort. So you're getting a lot of value with a very few hours, very low cost, but also those items that require major testing. So implementing encryption or auditing a lot of times require performance testing. So you may have to go through a week performance testing cycle if you're doing it not as part of the upgrade, but you may be doing that performance testing during the upgrade. So isn't that a great time to leverage those performance testing cycles that are already being completed? And then also implement those items that have a low project risk. The key is during the upgrade, you don't want to be introducing any new risk into the upgrade process that you don't already have. The upgrade is already significantly risky enough, just trying to get it most likely done in one weekend. So anything that may impact that or actually cause the upgrade to fail during the cutover weekend would be significant. So as each part of the upgrade process and each major milestone of the upgrade project, you can actually incorporate some security tasks within those. So during the evaluate session part of the project, you're evaluating what needs to be implemented. You're doing a gap analysis on the functional side between 11i and R12, what you wanted to implement as new features and functionality, probably reviewing some customizations, things like that. This is a great time to do a security and compliance gap analysis. So you're looking at what are our auditors concerned about in an 11i environment and what can we correct as we go to R12. You're also looking at the technology stack. You're getting a brand new database version. You may be going actually from like a 9i version to an 11g version, which has significantly new security features, including encryption and other things. So it's a great time to review those and at least have an idea what makes sense to implement as part of this project. Then during the planning session is looking at some of your processes overall. When you're creating new users, there's actually a significant new functionality within R12 user management that allows you to streamline the creation of new users and improve that process. You're reviewing the customizations. So look at what you can do during that customization review process to identify potential security vulnerabilities and other things. As you move into the testing cycle, incorporate a lot of these new functions and features in that testing cycle. So you're actually doing it one time. You're leveraging. It's almost free testing at that point. And then during the actual upgrade, implement the latest security patches and implement these security features when you're doing it so you've actually got it when you go live. And then kind of at the end of the upgrade test, you may have 72 hours or 48 hours to actually implement that. Perform a security scan as the last step to make sure that you've actually done the appropriate hardening during the upgrade. A lot of projects leave off the hardening task, so there are new passwords, there are new patches that should be applied as part of the upgrade. And then post-upgrade, one of the major problems about an upgrade versus a new implementation is that the upgrade is stuffed into maybe one weekend. You're really just trying to get the whole thing upgraded in place versus a go-live where you can actually stage everything fairly well ahead of time and then kind of flip the switch, maybe do some last-minute cutovers. But the upgrade is a little bit more strenuous as you're going through and you're just basically having to run processes, making sure the database is upgraded, making sure the application is upgraded okay, and everything is working. So a lot of times we recommend doing a post-upgrade review just to make sure everything was done right, that things have been locked down accordingly, best security practices have been followed, and things like that. So when we're talking about some potential security enhancements to your environment, this chart here shows some of the key areas that you should be potentially looking at, and we'll kind of walk through a few of these, and looking at what kind of security value they add, how much effort they may take to actually implement, how much testing is required, and then kind of what the risk is to the environment. And I've ordered these in basically what Integrigy looks at as if I had a chance to upgrade my internal implementation, what would I be looking at first? What would probably be providing the highest security value? And from Integrigy's perspective, the greatest thing you can do to improve security in your Oracle E-Business Suite environment is basically restricting database access. I dramatically reduce my risk profile and my footprint if people can't directly access my database and log in and perform transactions directly, read data. And there's two major issues with that. One is if someone can log into your database, they can actually go in and perform security vulnerabilities and actually take over your database fairly easily. Anyone who's actually been on any of our other webinars, we actually demonstrate that fairly readily by accessing an account with only public permissions, executing a publicly published and that we were able to find via Google, and actually take over an entire database with the lowest level privileges. The other area is that if you've got credit card numbers, social security numbers, if people can't directly access the database, you're reducing the risk of them actually stealing all that data. If they're going through the application front end, they're more likely able to get 1 or 2 credit card numbers. But if they're actually going to the database, they can actually query the entire table and maybe steal 1 million credit card numbers. It's a very different risk profile. And so one of our major recommendations is restricting database access. You're getting a high value out of that type of project. Other areas are auditing. Very few clients of ours actually have implemented significant auditing. Auditing gives you the visibility of what actually is happening in your environment and a little bit more information to know, okay, is someone doing something that they shouldn't be? Next is encryption. If you've got any sort of credit card numbers or social security numbers, encryption provides a significant improvement in your security posture. That basically if someone is stealing those numbers, they actually have to get past the encryption first and have some sort of authentication to do that. And then some of the other areas are security patching, hardening, database access controls. A lot of organizations have an apps read account that has unlimited access to all the data. Is that appropriate for your environment? What would your auditor think of that if they actually knew exactly what was happening? Data scrambling and single sign-on are two items that might actually be left off as part of the upgrade project. Data scrambling doesn't really require much testing and can be done any time. So that's actually a good one to implement not as part of the upgrade. And also single sign-on is actually fairly strenuous to implement, can actually have a lot of testing requirements and actually includes a lot of risk to the overall project. So the last two, data scrambling and single sign-on, are two examples of things that we'd actually probably recommend you don't include in your upgrade project. So I've talked about fixing and implementing security processes. So this chart here actually looks at major processes within the Oracle E-Business Suite, and these are basically operational processes across all the technology stack components. So across the top there is Oracle application, the database, the application server, and the operating system. And then down the left-hand side is basically key operational processes that are related to security. And these are basically mapped back to some of the industry's security standards, such as the ISO 27001 and the auditing standards COBIT. And so if you talk about user management, this is an example of one of the processes that you should be reviewing during your R12 upgrade. What changes can you be making to that process due to new features or because it's a good time to change it? User management within Oracle has actually dramatically improved under Release 12, and you can actually do a lot more workflow processes and things like that. Database security is another area where you can make a lot of improvements as part of the project. Auditing is a significant area that you can actually add in a lot more auditing. You're being able to test it at the same time and go through that process. So that's a brief overview of kind of why security should be improved during your upgrade project, why it makes a lot of sense, why you can actually cut costs long term by doing it as part of the upgrade, and actually potentially reduce some of your risk and exposure during the process. So now I'll talk about some of the differences between 11i and R12. What are some of the significant differences from a technology and security perspective that you should actually be aware of? The first item is there's a significant technology and architecture difference between 11i and R12. The biggest change happens at the application server. So if we're looking on the left-hand side at 11i, which is 11.5.10.2, or on the right-hand side, I actually picked the most recent version of eBusiness Suite 12.3. When we're talking about 11i, there is a lot of old stuff in 11i. It actually makes me cringe as we go through and do security assessments at different clients, just how old and antiquated the technology stack for 11i has become. Within the application server, the key component, the web listener, and that's basically what's handling all those web requests, is a version supported by Oracle of Apache. That's version 1.3.19, which is actually about 6 or 7 years old. The latest version in R12 is 1.3.34, which is a fairly recent version. It's still not even up to date in the most recent version from Oracle or from Apache team. The other part about the application server on 11i is it's 1.02.22, which was actually desupported by Oracle sometime, I think, in 2005. And within that technology stack is JServe, which has been replaced by OC4J in Release 12. But the JServe version that's running within 11i, within your 11i environment today, is from 1999. So it's an 11-year-old version of JServe running. We actually have looked to do some security features and enhancements as an add-on product, and we looked at possibly doing it with JServe, and there was no way we could possibly do it because it's such an antiquated technology. It doesn't support any of the recent standards and things like that, where it's very easy for us to implement an add-on security layer in Release 12 because OC4J is a fairly recent version. Another item that has changed significantly is ModTail SQL was removed in Release 12. ModTail SQL is actually a fairly old technology and was the first web architecture that Oracle incorporated into Oracle eBusiness Suite. Unfortunately, it has a lot of security vulnerabilities historically and provides direct access to the database. Another area that's significantly far behind is reports and forms. So the reports and forms Oracle Home is actually an 8.06 version, and that's very ancient. Some of the advantages in Release 12 on the application server is that the application server is now upgradable. Since you haven't been able to upgrade the 11i Oracle application server since 2005, it's kind of a very nice benefit. You're both getting new features, and you're actually getting some hidden security features when you're doing those upgrades. So that's kind of a brief overview of the architecture differences on the application server. Some of the technology stack component upgrades have been significant there. Some of the other major differences are a database upgrade makes a huge difference. So a lot of customers who are 11i are actually 9.2.08. Some are 10.2.04, but most that we run into are 9.2.08. So when you're upgrading from 9.2.08 to potentially 11.2, which is 11GR2, there's a significant feature capability within that release. One of the major ones is if you're interested in doing encryption, TDE now has tablespace encryption, which actually makes implementing encryption, especially for custom schemas, extremely easy. Some of the other changes are the JInitiator is now gotten rid of. That happened in 11i, but it's actually the only capability within R12 is now running the Sun JRE, or the Sun Java plugin. Again, mod PL/SQL has been retired. It was just a bad technology. It had so many security holes over time. Oracle had to put a bunch of layers in to basically block access and things like that. It's good riddance to that, being a security person. Another area, the form server, you could do this in 11i also, but now it's mandatory or highly recommended in release 12 is now the forms listener servlet's running. So you've actually gotten rid of one port. From a security perspective, I want to reduce my footprint. I want to reduce things that are being exposed, and having one more network port closed is actually beneficial. And then finally, another area that's been improved is basically the Oracle reports is being phased out in terms of support, and XML Publisher, BI Publisher is being the new product. BI Publisher has an improved security model and a number of features that Oracle will take a lot of advantage of in the future. So that's some of the key architectural differences as we talk about 11i and R12, especially from a security perspective. Another change that's coming up is for the critical patch updates. If you're a DBA in the 11i environment and you're really sick and tired of applying one-off patches for each security vulnerability patched as part of the critical patch updates, all the critical patch updates in R12 are cumulative. This was introduced in January 2010 for 11i. A lot of DBAs haven't taken that yet, but within R12 they're cumulative. One of the areas we do see a major problem is when customers are upgrading to R12 is it's a fabulous time to get your security patches and get them up to date. And it's very easy to do because you're already doing all the upgrades. You're doing the database upgrade, you're doing the application upgrade. So to apply one more patch on top of that, include that in the testing cycles, is actually fairly trivial. The patches aren't that hard to apply, and you're just kind of flowing them into the natural testing cycles. One of the things that a lot of customers don't realize is when you're actually applying these upgrades, they most likely do not include the most recent security patches. So we had a customer recently who basically went from 11.5.10 and they implemented 12.1.2. And this was in July 2010, and where they implemented, and basically we did a security review in August of 2010. And basically had discovered that their security patches were back. Their last security patch applied was from October 2009. And they're like, how would that be possible? Because we applied the most recent patches from Oracle in terms of the EBS version. Well, the EBS version includes the patches available at the time of release. So when 12.1.2 was released, the latest CPU available was October 2009. Oracle doesn't go back and put in the most recent CPUs into each release. They basically push that burden onto you to basically apply those security patches. So be very careful when you're actually going through your upgrade project and you're finalizing which versions will be implemented. Look to include the most recent CPU. And if in doubt, actually reapply the patches. It doesn't hurt to actually reapply a CPU patch to it if it already exists. One of the big problems with this area is also that Oracle doesn't document it. So there's nowhere in the documentation in 12.1.2 that says, oh, by the way, you have to apply patches after October 2009. The two dates you'll also see on there are January 2011 for 11.202 on the database and 12.1.3 on the eBusiness Suite. Those are actually coming out next week. So anyone's looking for those patches, on January 18th, I believe the date, is when the next CPU will be coming out. And those two versions will have their first supported CPUs. Anyone interested in the CPUs, we actually give a webinar also for each quarter CPU release, and we actually dive into the actual vulnerabilities and we'll demonstrate some of the vulnerabilities patched. So there's one at the end of January for the database and one in February for the eBusiness Suite if anyone's interested in that. You can find those on our website. So that's a brief overview of the security patches. The next area is basically a few things are added during the upgrade process that you need to be aware of. And we can catch a lot of customers on this because a lot of times these accounts are enabled and have default passwords. One is application users are added. So here's a basic list of the application users added as part of the 12.0 and onward upgrade. So it may depend on which version these were actually added in. but these will actually be added in over time. Fortunately, these accounts are all added, and they are added with invalid passwords. They're active, but the passwords are invalid, so you can't log into them. All Oracle E-Business Suite environments are actually created with a large number of default accounts. There's about 20 at the application level that all need to be disabled and have their passwords changed. So just like there's application accounts, there's also database accounts added. So within the Oracle E-Business Suite data model, there's one database account for each module. So when Oracle adds a module, they're actually adding a database account with a default password. So here's a brief list. This is partial. We haven't included every single E-Business Suite version. But here's just an example of some of the database accounts. Unfortunately, any of these database accounts can be used to take over the entire database. Even though they seem like they're only owning data, they're not meant for transactions or to be logged in, they're all active accounts with default passwords. So if you look at the ITA account, the password will be ITA. And based on a few packages that that account has privileges in, I can execute any SQL within your database. So it's very important, and these are not well documented again. Oracle doesn't have a list at the end of the upgrade instructions, oh, by the way, change these accounts specifically. What happens is the DBA says, oh, yeah, we changed all those passwords a long time ago. Well, over time, every time you apply a patch or a major upgrade, these accounts are being added every single time. So that's a brief overview of some of the differences between 11i and R12. Now we'll talk about briefly some of the key security enhancements, and then next will be the security features that are added as part of R12. And this is just a very high-level list. I've tried to pick items that you may not be actually familiar with. There's some very low-level ones that everyone should know about. But these are more items that are being added that you may not be aware of that actually provide a lot of security value. The first area is actually database accounts. So within the database accounts, there's a number of security features that have been added and that actually are very beneficial. First, there's a major issue with Oracle database accounts that if I can get to the DBA user table or the user dollar table and get the password hashes, I can then go in and basically crack those passwords offline and then basically go into your production environment and actually access data. One of the problems in Oracle database passwords is that they're not case sensitive until 11G. And by default, the case sensitivity is actually turned off even in 11G. So what happens is they're very easy to crack. I can go in within a few seconds and try millions and millions of combinations of passwords and actually find out potentially your production passwords. And the scenario here is you're basically cloning your production environment down to a development or test environment. Typically, the DBAs only change like the app's password and maybe the system password, but they're not changing every single password. So when you're developers, and a lot of times in the development environment, access restrictions are very much eased, and that developer would be able to get access to the DBA user table or the user dollar table, and 11G would be required. Well, that developer may be offshore in India. He can potentially go into your development environment, take those passwords, take them home, crack them, get a production level password that might have DBA privileges, and then basically go in your production environment and then be able to access any data they want. So within 11G now is this case sensitivity. Within eBusiness Suite, it's turned off by default, but you're able to enable it to now allow much more complex passwords that are case sensitive. The one exception to this is basically Apple says pub always has to have an uppercase password. The second major enhancement to database security as part of Release 12 is there's actually a new utility. The old utility was called FNDC Pass. It still exists in R12. But now there's AF Password, which is a little bit more advanced than FNDC Pass. Unfortunately, FNDC Pass still has to be used for a couple functions. But the key feature of AF Password is that you're now allowed to lock all the product schema accounts. So these are basically the account for each module, so GL, AP, AR, HR, those type of accounts. You're now able to actually lock all those accounts. So even if they do have a default password, no one could log in as them. And the command line is actually very simple. It's AF password -L true. As long as your two task is set, that's all you have to do. It'll lock all those product accounts and actually reduce your vulnerability and your risk profile tremendously. And all this is actually documented in the System Administrator Guide in the configuration manual. A lot of people have missed the AF password And if you actually look on Metalink, there's actually only 1 or 2 references to it. But it's actually a very good utility, works fairly well, and provides a lot of benefit, especially locking accounts. And finally, the last area is the AppleSysPub password. Everyone knows there's an account, AppleSysPub. It's very restricted. The password is always set to pub. The problem with AppleSysPub is if I can access your database, I can log in as AppleSysPub and exploit security vulnerabilities. Even though it's a very lowly privileged account, it can easily take over the database if there's a published security vulnerability. In 11i and prior, it was highly recommended you didn't change it, and we actually supported that because it broke too many things. ADI would immediately stop working in other things. It was fairly difficult to change the AppleSysPub password within 11i. Well, because ADI and some of those other tools on the client-server side are gone now, it's actually much easier to change the AppleSysPub password, and Oracle has fixed a lot of the bugs that were related to it. So we highly recommend people change the AppleSysPub password now in R12. The only caveat is you have to change it both at the database level and the application, and also within the auto configuration, because it's actually populated in several configuration files. So that's a high level for database accounts. So we'll talk about a couple other changes and improvements to security. And these are more low-level technical, things that a security guy would love. Maybe the Oracle project team doesn't care as much about, but they're kind of important from a security perspective. SSL is basically that encryption. So when you talk to your bank and you type in HTTPS within your browser, you're basically doing SSL. So it's encrypting the traffic between your browser and the application server. Well, there was a number of actually vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the way Oracle had implemented SSL for 11i. And Oracle has actually dramatically improved the support for SSL in R12, and they've actually implemented their own SSL module instead of using the open source one. One advantage of this is now you're actually able to use the Oracle wallet for actually storing the certificates and some of the management functions. And another feature is that the mod SSL was a fairly poor implementation by Oracle. They basically let you do anything you want. They had some of the older, weaker ciphers enabled, and they also had an older version of SSL also enabled. So those are now actually all fixed. You can only implement strong ciphers. So basically, if someone's listening in on your network, it'll be much more difficult for them to basically take that traffic and break into it. Another area is auto-config support for SSL is actually a lot better. And if you have noted the Metalink document ID there for information on implementing SSL within Release 12. Another area that has been improved and we've actually taken some advantage of is there used to be configuration wizards. Those have actually been improved in Release 12 from 11i. And some of the key setups like SSL, how you set up SSL acceleration, that's basically then you're using a product like F5 Big IP to basically offload the SSL. When you encrypt and decrypt things, it always takes a lot of processing power, and you can offload those to other devices. The advanced configuration wizards have actually been improved, and they actually work fairly well now to actually automate a lot of the setup. If you went through the setup documents before in 11i, you just kind of pull out your hair after a little while trying to figure out how to do this. In R12, it's actually much easier to do it and just going through a GUI interface. You can actually implement things like SSL fairly straightforward without a lot of deep security knowledge. And so that is a big improvement. So that is, at a high level, some of the new security features, or some of the enhancements. And so now we'll actually talk about some of the new security features that are in Release 12. And again, I'll try to pick some of the items that you may not be aware of versus the obvious ones. As I've been talking about, the greatest thing you can do to improve security in Oracle R12 environment is basically restricting database access as much as possible. Previously, Oracle had a feature called Managed SQLnet Access, which worked very well, but was almost impossible to manage. We have a few clients who've been able to implement it over time, but basically what Managed SQLnet Access did was basically list out IP addresses and say, well, this guy can talk to it, and nobody else can. And so you'd have your application servers being able to talk to your database. You'd have maybe a couple interface servers and maybe your DBAs. Unfortunately, that was just a static list. It was basically putting next to your phone a list of phone numbers that could call you, and basically just plugging those in. And if you ever wanted anyone new to call you, you'd actually have to plug that in each time. It was very time-consuming and not very easy to do because it was just purely you had to plug in each phone number or IP address to allow a specific connection. Oracle has had for a number of years a very good product called Connection Manager, which has much more advanced rules and ways to allow what you're going to allow into your environment and not allow into your environment. It's almost like putting a good firewall in front of your database server, but it's meant for Oracle SQLnet connections, and it's actually got some robust rules. Within R12 now, Oracle Connection Manager has been supported, and there's a meta-link note that details out the configuration. This is a product that's included with your Oracle Database Enterprise Edition license, so there's actually no additional cost. You can choose to implement it either on the same server or on a separate server because it will actually require that kind of architecture. But it's fairly easy to implement and has very robust rules, so you can actually eliminate a lot of the connections or people that are able to connect to your database, especially if you don't have a very good network design where you have a firewall in front of your data center or anything. So we highly recommend it, Oracle Connection Manager in R12. Another area where there's been significant enhancements is role-based access control and user management. One of our favorite new features within the application is user management. Role-based access control is basically a new standard that Oracle has implemented. It's based on an ANSI standard that's released and controlled by the U.S. federal government, and it basically says how you should do access control, how roles and responsibilities should be designed, and how those should map to actual functions and things like that. It's different terminology than Oracle's used to. It's not functions and menus and responsibilities, but it's the same similar design, how you assign a specific privilege to a role or a group of people. The advantage is that you're allowed to do inheritance, you're allowed to do categories. There's a lot of capabilities that you can do. Unfortunately, the implementation within Oracle E-Business Suite is not that robust. It's not everywhere. It's not really easy to implement. But what we've been doing with RBAC is actually implementing it for very specific cases, such as there's always that problem about how do you allow access to other people's concurrent manager requests or from a specific responsibility. That's actually very easy to implement through RBAC. There's actually some meta-link notes on how to do that in detail. At this point, I don't recommend going a full RBAC and totally changing the way you've done your responsibility design and redoing it, but if you selectively implement some of the new features within RBAC and pick certain cases where you can actually implement it, it works really well. The other major new feature is user management. We find at almost every client where you do an assessment some sort of issues related to user management. And it may be the way you do password reset functionality. It may be the way you do new passwords that are assigned to users. I can't tell you how many customers of Oracle are using Welcome as a brand new user password. We actually had a case recently that basically what happened was there was an AP department, a new AP manager started work. They were assigning Welcome to everyone's new account. Well, that new AP manager went off to training for 2 days, and one of the AP clerks in that department knew basically what their name was and therefore what their user ID was, and that Welcome was always assigned as the new password. And they were able to go in before that person started, sign on to the account for the first time, and since it was the AP manager, they had create vendor and some other privileges, and by combining their own privileges and the privileges of the AP manager, since they were able to access their account, they were able to set up a fraudulent vendor name, create purchase orders, receive against that purchase order, and basically cut a check for about $25,000 out of the system. Fortunately, it was caught, and everyone was baffled on how it could have possibly happened, and that was basically the scenario, is that person was able to use the Welcome, the brand new password, because there wasn't a strong, unique password assigned, and go in and perform that fraud. User management helps resolve that because some of the user registration workflows and things allow you to actually generate passwords, email those new passwords to people, and things like that. So it's very significantly improved and allows you to actually have some robust processes around your user management and your new user creation, allows people to actually request different roles and responsibilities and have approvals based on that. So there's a lot of capabilities there, especially if you have some weaknesses in your current processes. Another new feature within Release 12 is Proxy User. And basically what Proxy User does is allows one user to go in and act like they're somebody else. And this was really designed by Oracle for the assistant to the executive type model, where basically the assistant needs to go in and approve something because the executive's either too busy or traveling off. And so the assistant would then be allowed to go in and act like they're the executive and do the approvals or something like that. Well, this one feature is one of those features I really recommend you probably don't do. If anyone's familiar on the call with Jeff Hare of ERP Risk Advisors, this is one of the features that he absolutely hates because there are significant auditing issues. When you actually approve or create or edit that transaction is marked as the executive. You have no idea that it was the assistant going in as proxy user and actually executing it as the executive. So there's a very poor implementation of the audit trail and auditing issues related to that. So we don't really recommend you use the proxy user for that functionality. But most customers have a significant challenge around how do you manage concurrent manager requests and scheduling them. Because typically what happens is you don't want one person's account to have all those concurrent manager programs scheduled for like general ledger. You'd rather have multiple people with access to those to be able to create them and not create them. Proxy User is actually a great way to solve that problem because what typically people do is they create a generic account and then give that password to 4 or 5 people so they all can go and manage those shared scheduled concurrent requests. Well, when your auditors get hold of that, they usually can throw a conniption, and that's completely unacceptable because we have no idea who's actually running the GL posting program and things like that. Proxy User can actually be used to solve that because you still have the generic account, but you can restrict access to the generic account, so you actually have to use your own named account, use Proxy User then to access that other account. It's not a direct audit trail, but you can actually know who's been using at what time the shared account by going through the Proxy User log. So that is one advantage. Another improvement within Release 12 that people really haven't focused in on and was kind of quietly announced by Oracle. For those of you accepting credit cards and processing, transmitting, or doing anything with a credit card number in your Oracle eBusiness Suite environment, you have to be PCI-DSS compliant. PCI is a payment card industry standard, so Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express got together and said, well, anybody who's using our credit card numbers in any fashion has to completely comply with this data security standard. It's very robust. It's very detailed in what it requires. It requires significant auditing, requires you to apply security patches within 30 days, requires you to have password length of 7 or more, and it's 12 different major requirements with about 200 sub-requirements. It's very detailed, very difficult to implement in an Oracle eBusiness Suite environment. One of the major issues is the way Oracle has handled traditionally credit card numbers. First, they have to be encrypted, and second, people can only view credit card numbers who are authorized, and otherwise they need to be masked. And so there's been a number of fundamental flaws and weaknesses in the Business Suite environment related to the way credit card numbers are viewed, processed, transmitted, et cetera, and stored. As part of 11i and Release 12, there's been an encryption patch release, so you can actually encrypt the credit card numbers, and they're all moved into a common iPayment table, which is a huge improvement. But there are still a number of issues. And PCI has also released a payment application data security standard. So your organization has to be PCI compliant, but your application that you run also has to be compliant. And so they have a separate standard called Payment Application, PA-DSS. And you, as of, I believe, July 2011, you can only run an authorized and compliant payment application. Therefore, Oracle has actually gotten that compliance. And as of, I believe, in December, and for version 12.1 only, it is PA-DSS compliant. So it eliminates a lot of the problems on especially masking of credit card numbers and things like that that traditionally people have been struggling with. So if you need to be PA-DSS compliant, and anyone processing credit card numbers, I believe as of the date is July 2011, you have to be upgrading to 12.1. 11i and 12i will not be PA-DSS compliant. So that's kind of a hidden item related to 12.1 that a lot of people aren't aware of. So that was at a high level very much the improvements to Release 12, both enhancements and new features. And so kind of just to summarize and conclude now, when we're talking about doing an R12 upgrade project, the key is try to include security tests throughout the project. Very few upgrade projects actually try to improve security during the process. The key here is trying to find those things that are high value, such as implementing encryption or actually implementing auditing if you haven't done it. Get your security patches up to date. Things that don't require a significant amount of effort but do require significant testing. And the key is during your R12 upgrade, you're doing actually a lot of testing cycles. A lot of times you're doing at least functional testing. Hopefully you're doing some performance testing. And if you can incorporate these new features and functionality as part of those free testing cycles, you can actually reduce cost and reduce overall effort in the long term. The second part about the upgrade project is it's a great time. You're making configuration changes throughout your updating technology stack. So it's a very good time to reset and actually adhere to some of the security best practices. I've noted the Oracle document here, the Oracle best practices for securing the e-business suite. We actually, Integrigy wrote a lot of that document for Oracle. Unfortunately, it hasn't been updated since 2007. We're hopefully going to come out shortly with a new version of our own because Oracle has been lagging behind. But it's a very good starting point on how do you secure the e-business suite. What are all the different settings and profile options, initialization parameters that should be changed, all the database accounts changed. And then finally, as part of the configuration and the upgrade, look at the post-upgrade step. You should be validating the security configuration as either the last step of the upgrade process or shortly after the upgrade during the post-upgrade. Validate it. Use a review or do a scan. And the problem with e-business suite and security is e-business suite is very complex and it's very difficult to secure it well because you're talking about not only securing an application, but a database, an application server. There's network issues. There's operating system issues. And the problem here is it's really the devil in the details. One database account password not changed can basically allow someone into your database. And if you don't have any auditing, I can very quickly scan and find a default password out of 250 database accounts very quickly, especially if auditing is not enabled. No one would have any idea that I ever did it. And I found an account and was able to get in. So unless you're going through or doing a very detailed, thorough review of the security within your e-business suite environment, there's always something there. We do assessments every day, and we always find default passwords. Very seldom, there's maybe 1 or 2 cases in the last 2 years at a customer that we didn't find default passwords. They always creep up. As we saw in the upgrade process, you're implementing new modules. Those are getting added by Oracle, and they're not telling you when they have default passwords. And they're very easy to get in. And there's some new features within Release 12, such as locking all those accounts that provide you a significant security benefit. So that was at a high level. We want to just provide an overview of some of the things that we think you should be doing during your R12 upgrade to address security and some of the new features that let you dramatically improve the security, we think, in the R12 environment from 11i. And especially it's a very good time to do it because you've got those testing cycles, you've got the capabilities to do it, and you've got the timeline and the end date to do it as part of the project. So we left a few minutes here at the end, so I will open it up to questions. I think Phil might be gathering a few of the questions. Feel free in the box in the lower right-hand corner to enter any questions that you want answered or send an email to info@integrigy.com after the presentation. We are more than welcome to answer those questions.
Thank you, Steve. We do have a couple of questions here that's been submitted. The first one. Could you expound a little bit on security for privileged accounts as it relates to or applies to SOCs?
Fundamentally, one of the biggest problems related to SOCs in the Oracle e-business suite has been privileged accounts. Within the Oracle Business Suite environment, both at the application level and the database level, there's a significant number of database and application accounts that have significant privilege, but also are generic accounts. As an example, at the application level, you've got the apps account. The apps account is used by the application for all end users accessing it through the application server. It's used for all concurrent processing, and it's used by the DBAs to do all maintenance activities. There's no segregation of duties within that, and that's always been a huge issue when the external auditors and even internal auditors review the business suite environment. How do you control that? How do you know what your DBAs are doing? Because it's very hard to distinguish what the application is doing and what a DBA is doing. Unfortunately, in the R12 environment, there has been no enhancements to that area. There's been no improvements. There's nothing that I can point to that says, well, yeah, that's dramatically improved. The only potential areas within the Oracle Application Manager and some of the Enterprise Manager packs, it's easier to apply patches through those management tools. So DBAs don't have to be logging in as much to the application itself using the apps account, sys, and system, because they can actually do some of those things through those management tools and push patches to the environment. Unfortunately, to actually fix that problem and hopefully satisfy your auditor's demands, really implementing auditing and some access controls is really the key to that. Hopefully Fusion applications, which will be coming out supposedly this quarter from Oracle, will address some of those issues. But we haven't seen anything from Oracle to say yes or no to that.
Next question. We have iSupplier installed. What is the best way to reduce the downtime?
That question seems to be a little bit more focused in on the actual upgrade project and away from security. So I won't address the question directly, but I will address the security of iSupplier. Anyone who's implementing any external Oracle module, so iSupplier, iSupport, iRecruitment, iStore, there's a number of them. The security for the external modules is very specific. Oracle has, and it has not been fixed in R12 at all, inherently in the architecture, big problems. And we actually developed 4 years ago a product to help address that because we thought there were such significant issues and Oracle hadn't addressed them yet. Our product's App Defend. Oracle has mostly fixed the issues with workarounds. But anyone implementing any of those modules has to be very careful on the way you implement them. And there's a set of documents from Oracle related to DMZ configurations and how you actually secure the Oracle E-Business Suite when you're deploying it externally. And it's a very detailed, very granular type exercise to do, and it's very easy to make mistakes. But unfortunately, the way the application is designed is since you've got every module installed, you've got 40,000 web pages. So if you just deploy Oracle E-Business Suite to the internet in your DMZ or just straight on the internet, you've got full access to every single module that Oracle has. And what they've done is actually put in some methods to limit what can be accessed over the internet. Unfortunately, it's a very error-prone, very manual process to secure it that way. And then the second area is basically there's a responsibility governor. So if you are deploying it to the internet, you list out what responsibilities can access it over the internet. We find a lot of customers don't do those two steps very well and expose themselves because you're exposing your entire Oracle E-Business Suite environment on the internet. So if you're running HR internally and you're running maybe iRecruitment externally, if you don't do it right, your HR system is running on the internet and can be accessed by anybody. And if there's a security vulnerability or anything else in that, you can basically fairly easily grab data. And every quarter there's probably one security vulnerability that allows some sort of access or some weakness can be exploited to get into your application pretty readily unless you've implemented the DMZ security correctly. So that's a little overview of the DMZ security. I didn't answer the question directly, but that kind of gives you a little background about some of the issues.
All right, one last question, and that is, do you think IT security should be directly involved in the upgrade projects, and if so, why?
One of the major issues we see with the upgrade projects are they're just not implementing security. But on the flip side of the coin is the IT security department doesn't typically know much about Oracle. And what happens is either they're pushing demands that really can't be met well by an Oracle application and need to be met differently than most situations that an IT security person is used to, or they completely ignore the security of the Oracle E-Business Suite environment. So we often look at it as it's better to proactively involve the IT security group and at least get a liaison, walk through what you're doing, and that you're implementing SSL, and here's the standards you're implementing. Encryption, here's how you're implementing encryption. Such as within the encryption, there's a number of encryption algorithms that can be implemented. Well, some of them are right and some of them are wrong. Oracle includes a large number. Work with your IT security team to actually pick which encryption standard you're using, because they most likely have a standard or a preference. It's very difficult after the fact to go back and change those. So it is very beneficial, we believe, to actually have a multi-discipline group to actually do it. We're working on one project right now where we've got a group that of the Oracle DBAs, internal auditors, and IT security are all meeting regularly to actually address security and what needs to be done in the e-business suite environment, what weaknesses they've identified, and what are ways they can improve security. And the advantage is you're not going as an Oracle project team alone then. You've got basically a significant amount of support through the CFO organization, through the IT CIO, to say, hey, we need to implement this, even though the business may be pushing back, such as security patches. That's a huge area that a lot of people fall behind on because the business won't prioritize it. It's downtime, it's cost. Well, if IT security and internal audit are also saying, well, these need to be done, it's much easier to get the business to accept that than just having an Oracle DBA stand up and say, well, we've got security patches, what can we do about them?